Bonjour à tous, merci d'être venus. Je suis très heureux de vous accueillir dans ce symposium annuel de la FR Agorantic. Donc on a un programme assez intéressant, je pense, aujourd'hui, avec 4 présentations qui vont correspondre à des projets qui ont été financés par la FR en 2023. Des présentations courtes d'une demi-heure, 20 minutes de présentation, 10 minutes de questions, disons. Et on a également 3 présentations invitées plus longues, d'1 heure, qui vont être données par des intervenants extérieurs à la FR. Donc 2 ce matin, en commençant par celle que je vais bientôt annoncer, et puis une en début d'après-midi qui pour l'instant est un petit peu remise en cause parce que la personne qui devait faire la présentation est tombée malade. Donc il est possible qu'il y ait des petits changements de programme dans l'après-midi. Je ne compte pas parler très longtemps, je voulais juste profiter d'avoir la parole pour rappeler quelques dates relatives à la vie de la FR qui vont bientôt, qui correspondent à des échéances proches, avec d'abord le dépôt des propositions de sujets de thèse qui arrive très vite, c'est le 9 décembre, donc ça concerne à la fois Agorantic et le UR Intermedius. Et puis en janvier, on a 2 formations qui arrivent, avec la formation SparkQL le 9 janvier, pour laquelle les inscriptions sont encore ouvertes, Émilie, n'est-ce pas? Et un peu plus tard, le 13-14 janvier et le 23-24 janvier, on a 2 formations pour le langage R, la première qui concerne plutôt les débutants, et la seconde qui concerne plutôt les personnes un peu qui savent déjà un petit peu programmer en R ou qui auront suivi la première formation, et pour lesquelles par contre les 2 formations sont complètes. Donc je donne juste les dates pour les rappeler à ceux et à celles qui se sont inscrites. Voilà, c'est tout ce que j'avais à vous dire. Donc on va enchaîner avec la première présentation, une présentation qui va être réalisée par Vladyslav Sydoro. J'ai bien prononcé? Okay. Ah oui, il n'est pas sur le programme. Sydorov, ok. Donc un travail interdisciplinaire qui mêle archéologie et informatique. Et voilà, donc une présentation un peu plus longue. Donc juste une remarque générale pour tout le monde. Les présentations sont enregistrées et puis elles sont diffusées également en ligne. Donc il est important que, d'une part, les gens qui font les présentations utilisent le micro pour que ça puisse être enregistré. Et d'autre part, quand vous aurez des questions à poser dans le public, il faudra aussi les poser dans le micro pour que les personnes qui sont en ligne puissent vous entendre.
Bonjour. Ok. Pour bien commencer la journée, on va faire la présentation en anglais. So anyway, good morning everyone, and it has been presented the interdisciplinary presentation. So my background is in machine learning and informatics. But now I'm working on this kind of archaeological program, and it's actually archaeology, remote sensing, and deep learning at the same time. And basically, we're going to talk mostly about the archaeological parts because there's the interesting parts, and we're going to briefly touch deep learning just to say what we are doing, but we're not going to go into the details of the models. So anyway, our team is called Archaeoscape.ai, so it's also our website. And this whole program was started and pioneered by Dr. Damian Evans, who passed away last year. And he was basically the pioneer of LiDAR archaeology in Southeast Asia, responsible for the famous acquisitions in Angkor and surrounding areas. And since then, for the last 10-15 years, French researchers at École, Française, Orient, IFIO, have been working on this project, and I joined them last year as a co-director of this project. So right now we basically just have 2 PhDs and 1 external partner who is basically an expert in 3D LiDAR machine learning. So it's a very cool collaboration, and basically we are a bit small, but I think we do interesting things. So let's see what we're doing. Let's start basically with explaining what is LiDAR and basically why do we need it. So this very nice picture of some temples from the sky. So this is aerial picture from the helicopter, I think we did in 2012. And basically the issue with ancient remnants of civilizations from, let's say, 9th to 12th century, which is basically the period where the Khmer Empire was this apogee, is that people mostly built stuff. They built housing and most of the structures with perishable materials. So it's wood or earth. And aside from the monumental temple structures, which are made in stone, we have lost all of that, all of those remains because they are perishable. At the same time, we would still like to understand how these people lived, and from the satellite, from the aerial maps, we can roughly see the great structures, which are the famous barrages, which are these big ponds. Khmers were big proponents of hydroengineering, so they like to divert rivers and make ponds and utilize them for. They had like special structure you can see in the bottom left corner. It's a special shape, horseshoe shape of a pond around the temple. So there's a lot of the canals and stuff like this. And we can still see the remnants of those, the remnants of the big temples, but if you go on the ground, basically if you want to see the remnants of ancient houses, so you see something like this. So you don't see really much. And at the same time, if you start measuring the ground, inclination and the elevation, you actually can see maybe 5, 10 centimeters, sometimes 20 centimeter difference, which would indicate where the ancient foundation of the, say, ancient dwelling was. The thing is, we are talking about the tropical climate. So in tropical climate, you basically want to build your houses, even if they're made out of wood, on stilts, or at least on some kind of foundation, otherwise you get flooded. Not fun. So you can still find them, but it's difficult. You have to do a lot of prospection, and basically if you're on the ground, you don't see anything. One more issue, at the same time it's a blessing in disguise, is that there is forest. So tropical forest, which you could call jungle, but we don't call it anymore jungle, it's tropical forest. It's a proper decolonized term. Jungle covers a lot of the area in Southeast Asia. Used to cover most of Cambodia, but then, thanks to the start of the civil war, the start of deforestation, they killed a lot of forest. But the forest where it remains is actually obscuring our remote sensing capabilities, so you don't actually see much under the trees if you are taking a photo from satellite or from a plane. So that's not great, right? At the same time, just because there is forest means that there's most likely something remaining, because the area has not been repurposed for agriculture or for like modern developments. So at the same time, where there is forest, you're more likely to find something because it hasn't been destroyed and degraded. So you want to see this kind of slight elevation changes under the forest. How would you do this? Well, you do LiDAR. So you stick this kind of LiDAR aerial sensor on a platform. So this can be a helicopter, a plane, or a drone. So drones, we've tried all of those, and drones are basically, for the small-scale acquisitions, they cost less. So a drone platform is maybe like 200,000 euros, so it's possible to buy. Aerial platform, I mean, the helicopter aircraft itself is like a few million, right? And then even the aerial LiDAR is $1 million in itself. So you rent those. But if you want to cover large areas, you basically want to have a serious sensor, which is made by Leica, most often. You want to stick this sensor on top of the aircraft, and the sensor is going to shine lasers. It's going to shoot millions of lasers down, hitting the ground, and most importantly, it will pass through the foliage. It will pass through the leaves, through the canopy. So if you go into the forest, 1 second. So basically, if you go into the forest, you don't usually end up in complete darkness. In the forest, there's still some light passing through, and if you shoot millions of these points with laser rays, some of them will pass through the leaves. They don't actually penetrate the leaves, but since there's bound to be at least some space in between, they're going to pass, at least some of them, and they're going to reflect from first the foliage, so the second, the third level, and whatever level of the vegetation itself, and finally some of them are going to hit the ground and reflect back. And they're going to record it with the LiDAR sensor and basically have a XYZ coordinate, its intensity, some other data of well, whatever is below the trees. So if you take a cross-section, this would be something like this. This would be one cross-section of the LiDAR acquisition in the tropical forest. Here, most of the points are going to be at the top of the forest because, well, most of them are going to get reflected. And some of them are going to pass through, hit the lower levels of vegetation, and finally some of them are going to hit the ground. The thing is, for our purposes as archaeologists, what we really care about is things which are in the ground and the ground itself. So for now, what we are doing, we'll talk about later what else we can do, but for now, for the most part, what we've been doing is basically just filtering out the ground. So we end up with something like this. Here's this kind of points. And this is enough for majority of our applications because the elevation of the ground betray basically the ancient occupation from a millennia ago. So this 3D point cloud, which has been basically reduced to a 2D map, this becomes our new elevation map. And just to show you an example, this is pre-icon of Compounds Y, which is a very nice temple complex in the eastern Cambodia. Very beautiful, but basically if you see it from the top, from the satellite, you don't see much. I mean, you see the outline of the temple complex, you see some barrage, and that's it. If you shine light lasers through all of these leafy parts, you end up with the elevation map, which looks like this. So now you actually see much more. You see all the different ponds and the temples, which have been showing through the vegetation. And then, if you spend, like a year or two annotating and going into the field and confirming what you have annotated, you end up with a map like this. So here we had one. Well, basically, we have a typology which contains different colors. The habitation mounds, people used to live there. Lots and lots of ponds. Ancient Khmer people really loved ponds. So basically every habitation, every house had like its own separate pond, or maybe two, for reasons, cultural reasons. You have this very specific canals which which delineate the temples and all sorts of structures. Some of them we don't even know the purpose for. But basically this is the end goal for the mapping. This is what we can get from this map. So this is very good, and I'll explain also why. So Cambodia, Angkor, this is our first campaign, 2012, 2015. This is a regional campaign which we got extended 2020. Basically this is the Angkor tomb in Angkor Wat. It's a famous temple complex, capital of the ancient Khmer Empire, which, I think it's on the flag of the Cambodian state. So nice complex. So before LiDAR, we could annotate. This is kind of the map which we had. Basically, what you see on the aerial scans, what you see in the monumental structures, you annotate. You make this kind of map. And this is already good. Something you see is the basic structure, city blocks and whatnot. So after LiDAR annotation, we get something like this. So this also takes years of validation and clicking, lots of clicking. So we have PhD students clicking this because it's actually, you need to know the context, and basically you have to be a PhD student to be able to understand the difference between the different structures. But see, the difference is quite spectacular. This is really something which you can get with the LiDAR. So the idea is that we apply this everywhere where we think there is vegetation or where there is interesting regions. And basically I'm going to talk about our project. So we, of course, we like access. So we have the 3 axes. One is the acquiring data. This is the cool part where you go, you fly on a plane or a helicopter, you shoot your very expensive tool, you get your returns, and very impressive. You know, you fly on top of the mountains. Second part is the one which I'm actually supposed to be my job. So interpreting and analyzing. So this is the PhD students looking at the footage and clicking. This is the machine learning automation. And then there is analysis, which is, well, basically our job as researchers to analyze. And finally, the aggregation is you have to understand what you analyzed, and you have to prepare it as a, well, it's a paper, it's a scientific output, and to share. So let's start with acquiring the data. So acquiring the data, we started in 2012, 2015, basically with Khmer Empire. So the heart of the Khmer Empire was Angkor and surrounding areas. You hope you can see, your eyes can distinguish. So the yellow points is the Khmer Archaeological Consortium, which is our first acquisition in Angkor Wat and nearby areas. Then the blue areas is the Kali, which is a Cambodian Archaeological LiDAR initiative. A very long name, but you know, it has to be like a 4-letter abbreviation, so it sells well and you get funding for it. So here we extend a bit more. As you can see, it goes further, some of them to the border of Cambodia, and basically it's twice the area. And finally, we had a collaboration with the Champa project, which is the AFD-funded project. Basically, French government money paying Laotians to develop their country, you know, diplomacy, but you can also do some cultural development and scientific development. And as part of that project, we had acquired an extensive, like 5,000 kilometers squared area in Laos, in Champasak region, which is that dark yellow part. So still, we're talking about kind of Cambodia and surrounding areas. So the heart of the Khmer Empire. So if you zoom, so we're talking about Southeast Asia. So far, this has been mostly Cambodian teams, the Cambodian-centered project. Now, in 2024, for reasons, basically we wanted to extend. And we did, we extended our project from just the Khmer heartlands and the Khmer Empire to, in general, rainforest civilizations. So our focus was basically wherever we see an interesting, promising region, which is covered by the forest, it's in the Southeast Asia, it's tropical, so we can fly a LiDAR there, and we can get interesting footage, interesting returns. And first we covered Cambodia once more with specific points of interest with UAV. This is the red dots in the Cambodian area. Then we did extension to Thailand, which is Sukhothai. It's kind of northern Thailand. It still has relation to Khmer Empire because Sukhothai Kingdom used to be a vassal of the Khmer Empire at its apogee, and then it got independent, and it's also considered as one of the starting points for the Thai civilization. So it's the first Thai kingdom. And finally, we had this extension in East Java. So it's all the way to the down south in Indonesia, which has no relation at all to to, well, Cambodia or Laos, but still very interesting. Also, it's quite different in terms of the landscape, because East Java is mountains, it's volcanoes, so it's different civilization, different landscape, which is interesting for us if you want to explore different ways to capture the features with LiDAR, and if you want to train our machine learning models to be more robust to these kind of changes. So basically, LiDAR campaign, as you can see, is like a point. Here is LiDAR campaign. So what is LiDAR campaign? It's this kind of it's an endeavor, I would say. So first you have to do aerial acquisition. So you have to fly your expensive plane with expensive sensor on it. As researchers, French researchers, we can poor, obviously. So we have to rent it, and we have to beg for money from Europeans mostly. Sometimes they give us some money with the RC projects, right? So you have to prepare your flight operations. So you have to scope the parameters of your acquisition. So first it's going to be preliminary surveys. So you have to understand where you're going, what kind of area you're going to cover, and you need to designate the parameter. You know how high you're flying. If it's in the mountainous area, basically the angles of attack, the flight plan, and you have to discuss it with people who are actually in the know, who know the local conditions. You have to check the vegetation. For example, if the vegetation is more dense, you have to fly over, or you have to fly at a lower altitude. Anyway, all sorts of technical parameters, which are very important, because I can tell you for sure, if you don't do it right, you can waste a lot of money, because you have rented the plane, you have rented the sensor, you flew, you wasted 100 to 200,000, maybe more, and your data can turn out to be unusable. And then you just sorry. So, like, good luck now. It has happened multiple times, so you have to get it right. Then you have to do the point cloud analysis, which honestly, most of it we outsource, because the companies which do acquisition, they're also working with the raw data, and they're pretty good at this. So the initial denoising and even the classification, we for now outsource to the companies that are flying, which usually they have a team of research engineers who are going to move these points in the proper way. So basically, in the end, we end up with a 3D point cloud, which has mostly been classified and denoised, and then we produce a 2D imagery. So from 3D point clouds, you remove all sorts of stuff which is not ground. You end up with 2D imagery. You can map it to some kind of 2D map, which is more easy to work with. And then you have to do interpretation of the features, archaeological features. And this is something which actually you need archaeologists for. So here, the company which is doing the acquisition for you, which is getting the points, they're pretty good at this because they paid a lot of money by the oil companies, the companies which are doing prospection for natural resources. It's how they survive. So usually archaeologists don't actually have so much funds to fund this kind of projects. The companies which you hire for this, they're experienced at discovering natural resources, but not so much the archaeological features. So then you have to add your know-how, add your background, delineate the features. So go to all sorts of slight elevation differences, apply different processing to recover basically what you think is archaeological feature. And now you go to the third part, archaeological follow-up. So the thing is, most important thing with any kind of LiDAR project which is outside of France is, especially in Asia, local authority collaboration. So if you have the ear of the proper person who is responsible for getting you the permits, if you are gracious and polite, they may deign to grant you a permit to fly. Also, you have to work together with local researchers, because you're coming to a different country where they are already working on their own heritage for quite a while. Usually they know a bit more about it even than you. At the same time, they would like you to invest your money, first of all, and your experience to help them get a bit more. So you have to always be mindful of the local authority interests and basically play it well and diplomatically so that you have your permits right, so that collaboration works well. If you get wrong, if you insult the people by being, typical know-it-all Western European, basically all doors can close to you and no more work for you in this field at all, at least in this country. So once you got your local authority properly, local authority relationship properly set up, you got your permits right, you have your collaboration with the local researchers, like equal collaboration, then you can actually proceed with field verification mapping. And this means that you have a team of, for example, French researchers in collaboration with local authorities, local teams, are going and checking out, say, thousands of kilometers of other map, which you have kind of interpreted some features and pointed them out to be verified. You go in the field and you check them, and you see if what you have seen on the map corresponds to the reality, and then you adjust your map. And this is a project which takes, honestly, years. So we have, I would say it's basically 1 year per 1,000 kilometers squared if you are being fast and efficient about it. And then you have to do the synthesis. You have to, you're just doing your map. Then you have to make some kind of conclusions from your map. You have to do some actual science. And that is the part which involves publication and dissemination of your results and sharing your mapping also with local authorities. So I'm just going to quickly go through what we did. 2024. So this is the project in Cambodia. We have just covered points of interest with the drone. So it's a UAV platform, which is pretty good if you're interested in basically just 1, 2, 3 kilometers squared. So you get, it's very easy to set up. You fly your drone, you get your results, you move to the next point. So we did 12 locations in 1 year. It's pretty efficient. At the same time, if you want to go to a bigger scale, so anything beyond 100 kilometers square, you better bring like a real aerial platform, because first of all, it gets more expensive. So just because of the scale, how fast the drone flies versus the plane or the helicopter, you end up covering more with a proper platform. And secondly, the problem was teaching. With a drone, you cover your 1 or 2 kilometers squared, and you go back to recharge. You change the drone, you change the drone batteries, or you fly a second drone. Basically, you have a lot of these different stitched patches with LiDAR acquisitions. In post-processing, you would have to merge them together and recalibrate so that the points from different paths, from different drone flights, are going to align properly. And if you have a large area, you are going to basically go crazy from assigning and homogenizing all your different data. So definitely, if you want to go for a big area, you fly a plane or helicopter. So 2024, we flew one area in Sukhothai Historical Park with a plane. I didn't go there. I was busy doing some machine learning stuff. So basically just some photos of the preliminary results. We found a lot of stuff. Here's a picture of researchers, local researchers. So Cambodian, Thai authorities and our French researchers going together in the jungle, doing preliminary assessment of what we found. And finally, very important part, very important picture is our supervisor, who is taking over after Damien Evans passed away, Christophe Potier, handing over the disk with all the raw data to the local authority. And this is important always to have this picture, and basically always to do this, is that all the data which you get from the country, you always have to share it with the country and with local authorities. Make sure they get it, so that there is no questions about the data sovereignty. And this is a project where I actually went 2 times this year. Very cool. So it's East Java. There is an area with volcanoes Some of them are even active, there's pure ash and whatever. And there is a dormant volcano called Penangkungang. So this is the north part. And this was the area of worship for quite a long time. So again, from like 9th century to at least 14th. And it's covered with temples, which are actually visited by tourists. Some of them are pretty known to the locals. So it's not really a grand touristic area for international tourists. At the same time, as it turns out, there is much more there than just the temples which we see with naked eye. And we covered this area with a LiDAR just in July, and then we came back to September to do the preliminary surveys. And we found it's just covered in activity. So just to show you, so this is some points of interest which we noted down after going in the field. And basically, if you're looking at from satellite, it's covered in trees, it's a slope of the volcano, you see absolutely nothing. So with one of the LiDAR imagery, so here we have a hillshade, which basically you take your elevation map, you simulate the sun shining from a specific angle, and you get this kind of hillshade. And here, maybe if you have good imagination or very good eyesight, you can see correspondence between the yellow and the flat areas, but actually I think you don't see much here. Yep. Anyway, next imagery. So this is a slope map. Here is basically we are on a slope, and the intensity indicates the lighter it is, the stronger the slope. So this actually allows us to bring out these platforms where the sloping stops for a while, so that people can build housing and structures or fields. So we found really a lot of them, and if you go in the field, it looks something like this. So like typical archaeological prospection. You go, it's a bunch of forests, there's some snakes and scorpions, and you found some rocks. So this is what we found, a bunch of rocks, basically. And we really found a bunch of rocks, as you see, like very preliminary survey. We just clicked on the things which we found, and the whole mountain is covered in them, and we didn't know that these things existed, and it brings us to like new chapter of understanding basically what happened in this area for a long time. And it's a picture of me on top of this mountain. So very cool mountain. You go, you climb. There's tourists, and you can go. You can have your LiDAR map on your phone, and you can find just next to the tourist path, an ancient platform, or like a piece of jade. We found some pottery. It's usually one of the pottery parts. So anyway, after all this climbing the mountain, let's talk about the data analysis. So basically, if you have your topography, which is the elevation map, you can display it, you can show it to people in the conferences. It looks something like this. So this is a Laotian acquisition in the Champa project, famous Wat Pu mountain temple. So once you have it, you need to annotate. So what we have is it's an extremely efficient way, but not very scalable. Is you make a PhD student, you hire a very good PhD student who is good at clicking, and you make him annotate because he knows the background, he knows the archaeological context, and he can understand what's happening. And you open up the GIS, so Geographical Information System platform, something like ArcGIS or QGIS, and you start clicking. Click, and you do different classes, you get this kind of map. At the same time, it takes forever, and also, PhD students, they tend to finish their PhDs. You can't expose them forever. Sometimes they want to actually do something interesting. So you want to automate it, and not just hire more PhD students to reinforce this kind of cycle of academic abuse. So what we can do, for example, this is my part. which I'm supposed to be working on, is archaeological mapping with machine learning. So this is a preliminary, like from a year ago, result where if you train, so the ground truth is the part on the left, which has been annotated by our annotators. And this is what I've been showing before to you. It's the anchor tomb, the center. And the part on the right, one with the green, slightly visible, machine learning model predictions. It's the one which has been predicted with deep lab with shape baseline. So granted, it's not ideal. You can see that I don't know if I have my cursor, but basically it's not exactly covering the temple, but it's a good start. You get city block structure, you get some basic temples, and you get spawns. You see the failures. The failures stem from lack of context, because basically if it's a deep lab with tree, you basically split it into patches. Granted, overlapping patches, but still it's patches which are of the same scale, and we pass through it like a window. So in terms of the big barriers, so the part on the top right, it's where we fail because it's an absolutely humongous, huge pond, which has been drained because, well, you don't really keep them on for very long. It has been there for like 1,000 years ago. So now, if you are in the center of this barrier, it's just ground. So the network sees that, okay, it's dry ground, there's nothing else, and it predicts it as nothing, background. What you have to take into account is the context. So if you go far enough, so like 1 kilometer south, you see there is the barrier bank, the bend of the pond. And if you look at the big enough scale, you can see that this whole huge thing is a barrier. But you have to take this context into account, and for now, well, these basic approaches don't actually know it's this kind of thing. But we can add this, and we've been working on that. So that's one thing. Annotation, so automating the work of the PhD students, replacing them completely, still difficult. Things which are already possible and quite easy is to automate the boring work. So for example, the river network delineation. We have a bunch of rivers and canals and water. As I said before, Khmer civilization was famous for its engineering and especially hydroengineering. So these are the Kulin Mountains, Kulin Hills, north of Siem Reap, north of Angkor, which also house the ancient capital of the Khmer Empire just before the Angkor. So it's actually a very interesting place. You can go there. Very good pepper also. So if you go in there, there's the ancient capital, and there is also a lot of hermitage. Hermitage is where the ascetic monks, so mostly Buddhists in the Buddhist lived in isolation. So it's a very interesting part because they do some inscriptions. You can glean a lot of the information if you're into studying, the religious parts of this culture, the Buddhist. If you know Sanskrit, you can read some of it. The problem is that these hermitages, the hermits are usually solitary, and they don't leave much of the impact on the surrounding areas. So they live in caves, which they decorate, but they don't actually do like global construction around them. And it's hard to find them with LiDAR. At the same time, you want to find them anyway because it's cool research. So one thing which you can go for is that hermits, even if they're ascetic, they don't eat so much, they still eat and they still drink. So they most likely want to locate themselves close to the water source, and you can just follow the water sources. So even the small streams. This is something which is very, very annoying to do by hand. Clicking on all the different water streams is hellish work. It's just, you don't want to use your, expert PhD student to do this. At the same time, doing it with machine learning is very easy. So this is like a preliminary work. I asked my PhD student to spend 20 minutes on this and predict me the water in Kulin, and this is the output. So it works pretty well. So again, annotating the boring parts with machine learning works extremely well. Then there is also the boring part, but also important, identification of the looting holes. So one thing is that in Cambodia, during the civil war, which has been going for quite a while, as you know, there has been a lot of looting. So people, either the army or just local criminal networks digging up the ancient treasures and selling them off to some European collectors or American collectors sometimes. So basically, when we are doing annotation, very often we see these looting holes, so which is the looters digging up in the ground where they think the temple is. And honestly, if you want to annotate the temples, you just look for the looting holes, because the locals, most likely, they have good understanding of what's happening around them. They don't maybe want to share to all the noisy researchers coming and asking them, but if there is a looting hole on top of the mound, most likely it's a temple. And there's a lot of looting holes. So here, again, not the best choice with the colors, but all the yellow parts are basically looting holes in the Sambor Prekuk area in Cambodia. There's a lot of looting holes. And what we can do with machine learning is we can identify them and classify them and do a topology. And this is the work which we are doing. Basically, you want to understand where the looting has been happening, the historical context, the timing, and we can trace, we hope at least to trace, basically the things we found on the art market to the locations which have been looted to return later the smuggled cultural artifacts back to Cambodia. One more thing which you can do is future work. So I haven't even started doing this, but pretty cool. So the picture is stolen from the PhD thesis of Scott Holcomb. Basically, you can see the ancient rice fields. If you know what the ancient rice fields were like 1,000 years ago, you can estimate a lot of things, such as population density and population spread. Very cool stuff. Importantly, people don't actually change the rice fields so often. I mean, if a generation has created the rice field in one place, mostly you keep it the same way with the same delineation of rice paddies. More importantly, even if you do change, you're not going to bulldozer your rice fields to the exact flatness. So even in the new rice fields, you can still see the remnants of the old rice fields, just in terms of this kind of slight change of slope and small elevation. So here, even on satellite, you can see the ancient medieval rice field network on top of the modern rice fields. So based on the angle, you can estimate the relation to the ancient habitation, and you can do lots of interesting research there. And generally, there is a long tail of all sorts of archaeology applications. So if you have the LiDAR data, you can do a lot of research. One thing which we are developing right now is biodiversity work. LiDAR gets you 3D point clouds for basically everything from the top to the top of the tree to the ground. So far, as you have seen, we have been ignoring all the tree part because we wanted to know what's happening on the ground, what are the elevations. Same time, it means like 90% of the data which we have is not really used, but we could use it. First of all, there is a relation between, it's not very obvious, but there is a relation between ancient historical occupation and the modern ecological development. Even in pre-Columbian America, there's a phenomenon of terra prata, which is because of the pre-Columbian civilizations developing the agriculture, certain areas in Amazon which have much richer soil, which change the biodiversity in those locations. We also, anecdotally, we see some relation between the ancient occupation and the presence of the species, specific species, and just generally different vegetation patterns in Southeast Asia. Also, I mean, it's just obvious is that if you're doing your segmentation between the different trees and the ground, if you know exactly where the tree is and how it's located, you can segment the ground better. So that's something which we're working on. And then you can do biomass estimation, you know, you can do all sorts of trendy stuff, climate change and whatnot. And then there's also the social part, which you do land analysis, flood risk maps. So anyway, if you have the data, you can do lots of research. You just need some, well, some experience and maybe some body count. So, just basically quickly go over the aggregation dissemination part, which, you know, the third part, third axis. So that you have all your data, you do some predictions, and then you need to store the data, save the data, and share if you can. So basically, we have a bunch of data, we have a horde of data, so lots of data. You can trust me. And in 2024, we got roughly 800 kilometer square more of data. The thing with the data is that data is a glance. So you have the ancient, the yellow part is our ancient 2012 acquisition, and we extend it with the blue, and this is basically one-to-one, so it's at scale. We have a huge Champa acquisition, which is almost in one big block, which is very interesting if you want to study large-scale complexes. And then in 2024, we got these things, it's south. So it's the bottom right. This is the orange part is our Sukhothai acquisition. It's like a huge snake. And then the one in the green is the part in the mountains, in the volcanoes of East Java. So you got your data, and then you have to consolidate the data. And the problem with it is that, first of all, even if you have lots of data, you have to take into account the archaeological context, the field data, the historical surveys. Basically, just having the data without knowing the context gives you almost nothing. You can't interpret it. You have to have, you have to take into account that, you know, previous surveys have been done here before. This was the kind of things which we found. This was the ancient maps. So there is a temporal aspect of the ancient maps, and there's a temporal aspect of basically the environment which changes because there's developments happening all the time. It's not just empty land, people are living there and they're building the country. There is a question of integration, which is difficult because I'll try. Yeah. So anyway, it's hard. People don't really like to share, and again, open data is not really embraced in archaeology. So people, for reasons of data sovereignty, people from Cambodia don't want to share to somebody in Thailand or to Vietnam. You find it hard to have just archaeologists sharing the data in the open for all sorts of reasons, including the concerns about looting. And there is also a question of free storage. Storage is not free. You have to pay for your storage. And basically, if you have terabytes of data which you cannot share in open access, then it becomes complicated because, you know, you have your grant, user grant ends, and you have all your terabytes of data, which has this weird license, and somebody has to pay for it, but you have no more money for it. So you have to ask for more funding, and sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't get it. And the data is still there, and data gets lost and corrupted. So you have a situation where you have like millions of euros spent on data, and nobody to basically take care of it because of the weird sovereignty and the weird situation with the rights. So the two things we should try it. I'm going to go quickly. One is WebGL platform. You know, the open platform, open data, open code, but restricted data. So basically the idea is that you can use the data in a serialized way. You can use it in the field. You synchronize it on the web. And because it's a web thing, you can control the access. So different researchers can have collaborations according to what has been accepted. And then people which are not supposed to see the same data are not going to see the same data. So it's like a project in development, some pictures of the development stuff. And finally, we can do the machine learning dataset. And here, the point is that for machine learning to predict your archaeological features, you don't really, well, at least we don't really use georeferencing. So we can just release data without georeferencing with specific license, and then what we're going to do is we're going to basically ask the models to do segmentation for us, and this data we can release with licensing. It's basically the last part of the talk, which I almost don't have any time to, but this is basically our NIRP submission, and I'm going next week to present it. So this is a dataset for ladder archaeology, which looks like this. So you have your point clouds, you remove them, you have your DTM, which is a terrain model, you do annotations. And this is basically the largest open access machine learning dataset for ladder archaeology. It's almost 900 kilometers squared, 30,000 mapped features. Nobody actually releases that data, so we're the first to do it. And again, I'm going to skip it, but some historical context. This is the core of the Khmer Empire. And you have these large-scale features, temple complexes and hydraulics, some cool trees there. Basically, if you go in the field, you see nothing because the features have eroded, so you just see some cows, This is, there are some features there, but you don't see them. And some more stuff about how the mapping is done. So you go in the field, you do verification, you do surveys, you have hundreds of the surveys. And then, so like this kind of thing, you would note it down on a paper. All this helps you to refine your features, do ground verification. And so we do the very simplified topology because it's difficult for the machine learning to do it in the first place. So we did simple classes like mounds, hydrology, and temples. So as you can see, when you're in the field, you see almost nothing. If you're using the DTM, the elevation maps, you see much more. And this is what we want the machine to predict. And basically, the dataset looks like this. So this is all the data at a glance. So you can see it's like huge scale maps. So you can do interesting things with different scales. And please come download the set, publish your research, and beat our benchmarks. So you can, advance state of the art. And here we compare to the existing ones. The existing ones, especially most of them are closed. The ones which are open are kind of very small. So yeah, we beat them because they're big. And just 4 times the area, 6 times the annotation. This is a table of results. I'm not going to scare you with it. Basically, the results are going to be something like this. So what we found is that the foundation and models don't really generalize. So our data is a bit different, especially if the foundation model is something like Dyna V2, which is working on the natural images. They don't generalize very well to large-scale maps like we have, especially with the elevations, the DTMs. We found that hierarchical models, they do perform best. So if you don't have enough data to train, you don't have foundational models which work. So you can cheat by using this kind of hierarchical models like HVIT and some kind of hybrid like PVT-V2 stuff. So basically, it's different machine learning stuff. You want to have specific models which work better with this data, which you don't have enough data to train the proper thing. And yeah, the key is basically to have large adaptive fields so you can take into account all this weird stuff which is happening with large-scale structures in the context. And yeah, the fun thing is actually with UNet, you get most of the results. So researchers, so if you want to publish near RIPS, obviously you want to show the transformer networks, the best and the latest thing. You have to show your 2% increase over state of the art. But if you're an archaeologist, you just want to use UNet, you get most of this stuff there, So if you really just want to get pure results, you do engineering, you do UNet, and it's going to be fine. So some results, qualitative results. Basically, this looks much worse than what I showed you before because this is a hard example. Here, it's I think it's some Warpray Cook. So it's an area where there is an incline, and we haven't really trained, because it's a very specific area where the slope is constant, so it's not even constant, it's changing. It's a hilly area. At the same time, the features are very slight. So if you don't really train it, you can get confused very easily, because the machine learning network is not able to differentiate without being trained specifically between the natural incline and the incline of the features. So this is still where humans are doing much better, but we'll be able to train and beat them eventually. And some more stuff. Basically, you have to use both RGB and elevation. And again, RGB doesn't give you so much, because well, you have, again, RGB, if you have occlusions with the forest, you don't really get much in terms of performance. So anyway, use hierarchical models, and this is last thing. Yeah. So visit our website, please, and talk to us about how to do your machine learning slider. Thank you.
Merci, Vladyslav. Est-ce que quelqu'un a une question?
J'aurais deux questions.
Oui.
Je vais les dire en français parce que c'est plus simple pour moi. C'est dans la première partie sur les acquisitions LIDAR, donc à partir des raw data, la classification, elle est faite de manière automatique en usant de modèles classiques ou de logiciels qui font la classification automatique.
Vous voulez dire pour le 3D point cloud?
Dès qu'on a vous avez le point cloud.
Oui.
Après, il faut faire une classification entre voilà, cette partie-là. D'accord? Donc pour la classification, parce que moi j'ai des problèmes. Soit je travaille avec les raw data qui a été donné par l'IGN. Et donc si je veux sortir du bâti, je joue juste sur les number of return number, après sur les hauteurs. Et maintenant, ils nous ont mis en ligne du LIDAR classifié. Mais quand je travaille dessus, il y a des erreurs monstrueuses. Il se trouve...
Oui, c'est sûr.
D'accord. Et donc, vous avez fait comment? Ça a été classifié de manière automatique. Puis après, d'ailleurs, il y a un post-processing pour recorriger manuellement.
Manuellement, ça marche beaucoup mieux. Pour les petites acquisitions avec le UAV, avec le drone, on a fait que automatique. Et après, on a fait le post-processing nous-mêmes, parce qu'on peut, c'est pas si grand. Avec les grandes acquisitions sur grande échelle, on a payé, surtout en Asie, ça coûte beaucoup moins cher d'avoir dizaines d'ingénieurs qui travaillent sur ça. C'est obligatoire de faire le post-processing, parce que c'est beaucoup mieux de faire le post-processing en Asie, moins cher.
Je sais. Nous, chez nous, ça s'appelle des stagiaires.
Mais ils n'ont pas beaucoup d'expérience.
Oui, effectivement. Une autre question, c'est pour les acquisitions LIDAR, et surtout chez vous, dans votre terrain, c'est la civilisation de l'eau quand même.
Oui.
Moi, j'ai eu beaucoup de problèmes sur l'eau. Le retour des lasers, très souvent, ils passent en nul. Ou bien en noise.
Oui, c'est ça. Comme là, ça va pas faire la réflexion au même niveau.
Ouais.
Donc pour l'instant, si on a de l'eau, on ignore.
Ah, d'accord.
On peut utiliser, parce qu'en même temps, on prend les photos.
Okay.
Donc on peut filtrer.
D'accord.
Et si on veut vraiment utiliser LIDAR spécifique qui s'appelle paramétrique LIDAR, on peut, mais on n'a jamais fait ça parce qu'on n'a pas vraiment travaillé avec les points qui sont en dessous.
Oui, d'accord, juste le même problème.
C'est un projet intéressant, mais ça coûte encore plus cher.
Est-ce que vous avez essayé de travailler avec les données à très haute résolution de Airbus Industrie? Ils les font à 15 cm sur 6 des images satellites, avec 6 bandes. Et avec ça, on peut faire sortir 15 cm.
Non, est-ce que c'est cher?
Je sais pas. Je sais pas. C'est mon grand fantasme. Parce qu'à ce moment-là, sur les 6, avec les 6 bandes à 15 cm, tout ça pour faire les annotations, hein, s'entend. Hein.
Oh, ouais.
On arrive à faire... moi, je fais des tests avec, bon, pas avec les images les orthophotos de l'IGN. Donc, j'ai que le RVB et l'IR. Juste 4 bandes, on arrive à faire sortir des choses intéressantes. Mais avec 6 bandes, je pense que vous pourrez mieux préciser les annotations, je pense.
Oui,
il faudrait faire des tests.
Il y a toujours le problème de végétation. S'il y a de la végétation dense, même 40 cm, ça va aider, bien sûr. Donc, ça peut aider pour les parties qui ne sont pas couvertes par la végétation.
C'est ça, oui.
On n'a pas essayé parce que ça coûte plus cher.
D'accord.
Pour l'instant, si on fait le projet LiDAR, on demande beaucoup d'argent pour le LiDAR et on met la caméra, juste le RGB, sur la plateforme Ariane. Donc on a le même 40 cm, mais RGB.
D'accord.
Je peux dire que ça marche pas assez bien parce que pour nous, c'est la priorité, c'est de LiDAR. Les conditions pour la meilleure acquisition de LiDAR, c'est pas les mêmes conditions pour la meilleure acquisition pour les photos.
D'accord.
Si on travaille en Asie du Sud-Est, on a beaucoup de haze.
Oui.
C'est ça. On n'a pas les photos parfaites.
D'accord. Une dernière question, et je vous embête plus.
On a le temps, je pense. On a encore 10 minutes.
Bon, ah, s'il y a des personnes.
Mais s'il vous plaît, une question.
C'est sur les vegetation patterns. Donc, bon, je suivais aussi les travaux qui ont été faits en Amazonie avec la Terra Preta et tout, où contrairement à ce qu'on pense, l'Amazonie, c'est pas une forêt primaire, c'est une forêt entretenue. Oui. Ça a toujours été une forêt entretenue. Donc, ça, c'est... Et vous appliquez la même, je vais pas dire méthode, mais philosophie pour sortir les patterns, pour repérer des vegetation patterns entre guillemets anthropiques, faites par les hommes. C'est le même principe.
Oui, mais c'est future work. On est en train de demander le financement pour ça.
D'accord, ok, merci. Ouais, c'est super ça.
J'espère qu'on va être financé.
Airbus, je pense que Airbus, ils font des prix pour les projets de recherche.
D'accord.
Je vous contracterai. Je vous dirai.
Une autre question ?
Merci pour la présentation. J'ai quelques questions, mais plus sur l'aspect machine learning, mais vraiment rapidement. Donc, de ce que j'ai compris, c'est une tâche de segmentation sémantique, en fait, hein, sur des images 2D.
Oui, c'est ça.
2D. Et alors, plusieurs questions sur les catégories sémantiques, justement, que vous utilisez. Il y en avait 4, je crois, ou 5, je sais, sur la deuxième partie du travail.
Oui, il y a vraiment 3 avec le background.
D'accord.
C'est ça. Donc, ce sont les catégories super faciles. Donc, c'est tout. Ici. Mount, hydrology, temple. C'est ça. Parce que d'abord, on avait 9 catégories différentes qui sont sémantiquement différentes, mais c'est super difficile de faire la prédiction. Donc, on utilise le 3.
Ok. Donc, en fait, pour reconnaître ces catégories, vous avez des modèles qui sont pré-entraînés sur des bases de données de même type, ou vous entraînez vos modèles juste sur votre jeu de données from scratch.
Bon, pour l'instant, on voit bien que le pre-training ImageNet, ça aide presque toujours. C'est un petit peu mieux avec le ImageNet.
ImageNet, c'est autant que je sache, c'est un jeu de données où les images sont juste catégorisées, il n'y a pas de segmentation fine. C'est MS Coco. D'accord, ça suffit.
Pour faire le filtre tout d'abord.
Parce qu'il y a des jeux de données comme MS Coco qui justement annotent des catégories, enfin, sur des tâches de segmentation sémantique ou segmentation d'instance même.
Je pense qu'on a essayé les choses qui sont entraînées sur Coco, le Deep Lab, machin. Mais pour faire une ImageNet, ça marche presque toujours parce que c'est bien et c'est facile de trouver. Pour avoir la comparaison, c'est beaucoup plus facile d'avoir le trunk des modèles traînés sur ImageNet. oui, ça marche.
Ok. Et est-ce que vous avez essayé d'appliquer ces modèles parce que, de ce que j'ai compris, le jeu de données il est assez spécifique à Angkor sur une période de quelques siècles. Est-ce que vous avez essayé d'appliquer les modèles sur d'autres jeux de données pour voir s'ils se généralisent, enfin si ces catégories se généralisent ou si elles sont vraiment spécifiques au site et à la période?
Pour l'instant, c'est spécifique. Même si on a vu déjà le problème que si ça change un petit peu l'élévation, le caractère the character of the landscape changes. Again, because it's not natural images. What we are training on is elevation map, so it's a mapping from 0 to elevation like 250 meters. So from 1 to 250, with RGB on the top. So most of the pre-training which we are doing on natural images actually is useless. So the filters kind of help, but not so much. And then the kind of modality shift, modality change between the different, just different areas is already enough to throw us some difficulties. If we also change the categories, we don't work very well so far. We are working on this.
Ok. Et une dernière petite question, est-ce qu'il y a des catégories qui sont mieux reconnues que d'autres?
Oui. La table. Donc, pour l'instant,
oui, d'accord. J'avais pas vu le IUU. Ok.
On n'est pas top pour toutes les catégories. Mais franchement, ce qu'on a vu, on peut faire la prioritisation. Donc, si on est intéressé de prioriser le temple, on peut. C'est mieux d'entraîner le tout ensemble, mais oui, le mount, c'est plus facile parce que le mount, c'est juste l'élévation. Et pour faire la prediction de mount, il faut juste distinguer les mounds naturels ou les mounds qui sont anthropiques récents contre les mounds anciens. Et ça, on peut déjà faire MIP 50 ans.
Ok, merci.
Oui, la meilleure catégorie, c'est background.
C'est majoritaire aussi. Je pense qu'on peut applaudir Vladyslav. Et on va passer à la présentation suivante par Mounir.